Alright, this set of notes is on measuring populations. Hopefully you've reviewed the population basics information. This is the set of notes where we're going to take a look at dynamic equilibrium. This has to do with carrying capacity as well, which is the second one, and how the organisms interact. These are terms that you should already be familiar with, mostly because they're common sense. They are the 4 factors of population growth rate: birth rates, death rates, and immigration. If you're in AP Human Geography, these should be very familiar. Now, there are a couple of models of population growth. The first one is called the exponential model of growth. And it's a pattern of increase due to a steady growth rate, and it looks like this. The other term for it is they call it a J-shaped curve. It's not really a true J, but it does start out down here and come up. The thing about the exponential model of growth is that it can predict or explain patterns that are observed in reality. The negatives behind it is that this is only true under certain conditions, and it can only be true for a limited time, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about limiting factors and carrying capacity. But what this growth curve illustrates is that you have unlimited population growth. Everybody's healthy, everybody's having babies, and the population just continues to skyrocket. The reason why this is only true under certain conditions is because this population has to have unlimited resources. It has to have unlimited places to live, unlimited places or things to eat, unlimited water supply, all of those things. And of course, in reality, eventually, those will run out. The best real example of an exponential growth model would be an invasive species. So if you remember, we talked about the cane toads and how they're just generally sort of taking over. They have plenty of space in which to grow, so the population size isn't limited by space. They have plenty of food because, if you remember from our video, they eat just about everything. And they have no natural predators. So none of those things are going to limit the size of their population. So in reality, the only things that may actually have an exponential growth model are invasive species. And that's what we've just done. So I mentioned limiting factors, and these are anything that restrains the growth of a population. Food, living space, water, sunlight in the case of plants, any resource that an organism needs to survive. The bottom line, reality, all organisms are limited by their environment. A more realistic model of growth is called the logistical model. It's often called the S curve instead of a J. It looks somewhat more like an S. It's similar to the exponential model, but it accounts for the influence of limiting factors. So here we go. Here's our J-shaped curve that starts out. A true J-shaped curve would continue to go up, 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 up. In the case of the logistical model, they have ideal conditions for a while, but then the population starts to slow down, and then at some point it tapers off into a straight line. This straight line represents the point at which the organisms are competing with each other for space, for food, for other things, and you get a balance of organisms right here, and this is about how many the ecosystem can support over time. So let's compare these and talk about carrying capacity. Here's our J-shaped curve, our exponential growth curve, and here's our logistical growth curve model. The logistic is more representative of reality because the carrying capacity is that area where it levels off, where the ecosystem cannot support any more individuals. On graphs, the carrying capacity is generally symbolized by the letter K. Why, I'm not sure, but That's generally accepted in the field of science. So you may see that. Alright. So what's going on right here? The exponential growth curve comes up, and the logistical model curves over before it levels off. Now we understand why it levels off, because of carrying capacity, right? This is how many the ecosystem can support. So why doesn't the logistical growth model come up just like this one and then take a sharp right-hand turn here and level off? What is going on here that the population growth rate slows down long before it actually reaches the carrying capacity? Let's go back. The reason for that is competition. Even here, as the population grows, the organisms start to compete with each other for resources. They start to compete for mates. They start to compete for living space. So the growth rate slows down because not everybody finds a mate, not everybody finds a place to live, and because there are more of them available, that's going to attract predators to the area. Because what pack of wolves wouldn't move into an area with an exponentially growing number of bunny rabbits to eat, right? So the reality is kind of setting in here. Alright, this is where we're going to talk about dynamic equilibrium, because carrying capacity is shown as a straight line on the graph, but is that really what it is? Is there really only, 10,000 organisms that are suited for that ecosystem? And the answer to that is no. The population doesn't always stay at the exact same number, like at 10,000, but it's a dynamic equilibrium, meaning that some seasons of growth the population may be at 1,500, others it may be at 8,000, and it fluctuates along this line, but the average is what you end up with for carrying capacity. So the graph may actually go up and down a little bit, but it's the average. Population regulation. There are two types of limiting factors. We've already mentioned what a limiting factor is. There are factors that depend on the number of individuals in the population and those that don't depend on the number of individuals. So, density dependent. These are resources that become scarce as the population increases, such as food, living space, and water. Density independent limiting factors are things that are not affected by the size of the population. These could be climate, a cold spell, a drought, natural disasters, a volcano, a tornado, a flood, those sorts of things. Those don't depend on how many organisms are in the area. And sometimes predators can fall into either one of these categories. Alright, so there are 4 factors of population growth. Those are the pretty easy things at the very beginning of the slides. Next to that, we have the exponential model and the logistical model of population growth. Within those two graphs, you should be able to explain the relationship to the carrying capacity and what limiting factors are.